Wife vanishes with 3 kids during raging storm. What husband did will make you sick. The farmhouse, isolated on a windswept hill overlooking the vast expanse of Iowa cornfields, was usually a picture of rural tranquility. But tonight, it was a prison of fear. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and whipping the rain against the siding, mirroring the storm raging within. Maria, a woman in her early 30s, her face pale and drawn, moved with a practiced efficiency, her movements quick and silent. She was packing a small bag, her hands trembling, her heart pounding in her chest. She was preparing to do the unthinkable, the thing she had dreamed of for years but had never dared to attempt: escape. Her 3 children, Lucy, 8, James, 6, and Gabriel, 4, huddled together in the corner of the bedroom, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They had seen this before: the hurried packing, the hushed whispers, the palpable tension that filled the house whenever their father's anger reached a boiling point. Ethan, Maria's husband, was a man consumed by rage, a volcano of simmering resentment that could erupt at any moment without warning. He was a farmer, his body hardened by years of physical labor, his hands strong and calloused, hands that Maria had learned to fear. The abuse had started slowly, subtly, with verbal insults, controlling behavior, and emotional manipulation. But it had escalated over the years, becoming increasingly physical, increasingly violent. Maria had endured countless beatings, countless humiliations, countless threats. She had lived in constant fear, not just for herself, but for her children. She had tried to leave before, several times, but Ethan had always found her, dragged her back, punished her for her defiance. He had isolated her from her friends and family, controlling her finances, monitoring her every move. He had convinced her that she was worthless, that she was nothing without him, that she deserved his abuse. But tonight was different. Tonight, something had snapped. The trigger had been a seemingly minor incident, a spilled glass of milk at the dinner table. Ethan had exploded, his rage fueled by alcohol and a deep-seated insecurity that he masked with aggression. He had slapped Lucy hard across the face, leaving a red, angry mark on her cheek. It was the first time he had directly harmed one of the children. And in that moment, Maria's fear had been replaced by a fierce, protective instinct, a determination to save her children, no matter the cost. She had waited until Ethan had passed out drunk on the couch, the television blaring unwatched, his snores rattling the windows. She had then gathered her children, whispered instructions, and started packing. She knew the risks were enormous. Ethan was a dangerous man, and he would be furious when he discovered they were gone. He would hunt them down, he would punish them, he would make them pay. But she had to try. She had to escape, to give her children a chance at a life free from fear, free from violence, free from the constant threat of their father's rage. As she finished packing, she looked at her children, their faces pale and anxious in the dim light. She knelt down, pulling them close, hugging them tightly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. "We're going to be safe. I promise you." She didn't know if she could keep that promise, but she had to try. She had to believe that there was a better life waiting for them, a life beyond the reach of Ethan's control, a life where they could finally breathe free. The storm raged outside, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing against the windows. It was a terrifying night to be out, but it was even more terrifying to stay. Maria took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. She grabbed the bag, took Lucy's hand, and motioned for James and Gabriel to follow. They slipped out the back door, into the darkness, into the storm, and into the unknown, their escape a desperate flight from a nightmare that had become their reality. The breaking point had been reached, the decision made, and the perilous journey towards freedom had begun. The wind tore at Maria's thin jacket, the rain stinging her face, blurring her vision. She clutched Lucy's hand tightly, her other arm wrapped around Gabriel, who was whimpering with fear and cold. James, his small hand gripping the hem of her jacket, stumbled along beside her, his teeth chattering. They were running blindly through the muddy fields, away from the farmhouse, away from the only life they had ever known, away from the man who had terrorized them for years. Maria had no plan, no destination, only a desperate urge to put as much distance as possible between them and Ethan. The storm was a terrifying companion, the wind howling like a tormented spirit, the rain lashing down with relentless fury. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning that illuminated the desolate landscape, revealing the muddy furrows of the plowed fields, the swaying corn stalks, the distant, menacing silhouette of the farmhouse. Maria stumbled, her foot catching on a root, sending her sprawling into the mud. Gabriel cried out, his small body shaken by the fall. Maria quickly gathered him up, soothing him, her own fear masked by a fierce determination to protect her children. "We have to keep going," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "We can't stop. He'll find us if we stop." They pressed on, their bodies aching, their clothes soaked through, their spirits flagging. The storm seemed to be mocking them, testing their resolve, pushing them to their limits. Lucy, the oldest, was trying to be brave, but her fear was evident in her wide eyes, her trembling hands. She stumbled frequently, her small legs struggling to keep up with her mother's desperate pace. James, usually a boisterous and energetic boy, was unusually quiet, his face pale and drawn. He clung to Maria's jacket, his small body shivering with cold and fear. Gabriel, the youngest, was crying softly, his whimpers a constant reminder of their vulnerability, their desperation. Maria felt a surge of despair, a wave of hopelessness that threatened to overwhelm her. She didn't know where they were going, how they would survive, what the future held. But she couldn't give up. She had to keep going for her children, for their future. She looked up at the stormy sky, her eyes searching for a sign, a glimmer of hope. She had always been a woman of faith, but her faith had been tested, eroded by years of abuse and fear. Now, in this moment of utter desperation, she prayed, silently, desperately, for guidance, for strength, for protection. Suddenly, through the driving rain, she saw a light, a faint, flickering light in the distance. It was a farmhouse, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. She pointed towards the light, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Look," she said to her children, "there's a house. We can ask for help." Hope, fragile but real, flickered in their hearts. They stumbled towards the light, their steps quickening, their bodies fueled by a desperate need for shelter, for safety, for a moment of respite from the storm and the terror that pursued them. The escape had begun, a perilous journey through darkness and fear, but the distant light, the promise of help, offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to survive, a chance to rebuild their shattered lives. The storm raged on, but within Maria's heart, a tiny flame of courage and determination had been ignited, a flame that would guide them through the darkness and towards a brighter future. The farmhouse, silhouetted against the stormy sky, seemed to grow larger with each agonizing step. Maria and her children, soaked to the bone and shivering with cold, finally reached the muddy driveway, their legs aching, their lungs burning. Maria hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorbell. She was terrified of being turned away, of being forced back into the storm, back into the clutches of Ethan. But she knew she had no choice. She had to ask for help, for the sake of her children. She pressed the doorbell, the sound echoing through the house, a desperate plea in the silent night. A moment later, the porch light flickered on, illuminating a man's face in the window. He was older, with a weathered face and kind eyes, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. The door opened, and the man stood there, his tall frame filling the doorway. He was dressed in overalls and a flannel shirt, his hands calloused and worn, the hands of a farmer. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gentle, his accent carrying the soft drawl of rural Iowa. Maria's voice caught in her throat, her words tumbling out in a rush of fear and desperation. "Please," she said, "we need help. My husband, he's after us. We need a place to stay, just for the night. Please." The man looked at her, his eyes scanning her soaked clothes, her bruised face, her terrified children. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the fear that radiated from her trembling body. He didn't hesitate. "Come in," he said, stepping aside, opening the door wider. "Coming out of the storm. You're safe here." Maria and her children stumbled inside, their bodies shaking with relief and exhaustion. The warmth of the farmhouse enveloped them, a stark contrast to the cold, wet darkness they had left behind. The man, who introduced himself as Adrien Dubois, led them into a cozy living room, a fire crackling merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the worn furniture and the family photos that adorned the walls. "My wife passed away a few years ago," Adrien explained, his voice tinged with sadness. "It's just me and the dog now, but there's plenty of room. You can stay here as long as you need to." He brought them blankets, towels, and dry clothes. He helped Maria get the children settled, warming them by the fire, offering them hot chocolate and sandwiches. As they ate, Maria recounted her story, her voice trembling, her eyes filled with tears. She told Adrien about Ethan's abuse, about her years of fear, about her desperate escape. Adrien listened patiently, his expression a mixture of anger and compassion. He didn't interrupt, he didn't judge, he simply offered his support, his understanding, his unwavering commitment to helping them. "You did the right thing, Maria," he said, his voice firm. "You protected your children. You're a brave woman." Maria felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Adrien's kindness, his generosity, his willingness to help a stranger in need, was a beacon of hope in the darkness. Suddenly, they heard a noise, the sound of a vehicle approaching, its headlights cutting through the stormy night. Maria's heart leaped with fear. It was Ethan. He had found them. Adrien, sensing her terror, stood up, his expression hardening. "Stay here," he said. "I'll handle this." He grabbed a shotgun from behind the door, a weapon he usually used for hunting, and stepped out onto the porch, his body silhouetted against the light from the living room. Ethan's truck screeched to a halt in the driveway, its headlights illuminating Adrien's determined figure. Ethan jumped out of the truck, his face contorted with rage. "Where are they, old man?" he shouted, his voice slurred with alcohol. "Where's my wife? Where are my kids?" Adrien stood his ground, his shotgun raised, his voice calm but firm. "They're not here," he said, "and you're not welcome on my property. Turn around and leave before I call the sheriff." Ethan scoffed, his eyes blazing with anger. "You think you can stop me?" he said. "You think that shotgun scares me? I'll—" He took a step towards Adrien, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Adrien didn't hesitate. He fired a warning shot into the air, the blast echoing through the stormy night. Ethan froze, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. He hadn't expected resistance, hadn't expected the old farmer to be so resolute. "I said leave," Adrien repeated, his voice unwavering. "And I meant it. Get out of here before I use this on you." Ethan hesitated, his anger battling with his fear. He looked at Adrien, at the shotgun, at the determined expression on the old farmer's face. He realized he was outmatched, that he had underestimated his opponent. He slowly backed away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. He got back into his truck, his engine roaring, and sped away, disappearing into the stormy night. Adrien lowered his shotgun, his body shaking with adrenaline. He had faced down the threat, protected Maria and her children, but he knew this was just the beginning. Ethan would be back, and he would be more dangerous than ever. He turned back to the farmhouse, where Maria and her children were huddled together, their faces filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. He had offered them a helping hand, a moment of respite, but the storm was far from over. The escape had been successful, for now, but the pursuit would continue, and the battle for their safety and freedom was just beginning. Ethan, his rage fueled by alcohol and a bruised ego, sped away from Adrien's farmhouse, his tires spitting gravel, his mind consumed by a burning desire for revenge. He had been humiliated, defied by an old farmer, his authority challenged, his control over Maria and the children slipping away. He drove recklessly, his truck swerving across the narrow country roads, the storm mirroring the turmoil within him. He had to find them, he had to get them back, he had to reassert his dominance. He stopped at a dilapidated gas station on the outskirts of Harmony, the only sign of life in the desolate landscape. He slammed the door of his truck, his boots crunching on the gravel, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Inside the gas station, a lone attendant, a young man with a bored expression, watched him approach. Ethan grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the shelf, slamming it down on the counter. "Fill her up," he growled, his voice slurred. The attendant, startled by Ethan's aggressive demeanor, complied silently, filling the truck's tank and taking Ethan's cash. As he waited, Ethan's gaze fell upon a figure huddled in the corner of the gas station, a man dressed in worn-out clothes, his face hidden by a baseball cap. The man was nursing a cup of coffee, his body trembling slightly. Ethan recognized him. It was Peter, a local handyman, a man he had used before for odd jobs, a man who was easily intimidated, easily manipulated. "Peter," Ethan said, his voice low and menacing. "Come here." Peter hesitated, his eyes darting nervously towards the exit. He knew Ethan, knew his reputation, knew his capacity for violence. "Come here," Ethan repeated, his voice sharper. "I need your help." Peter, reluctantly, approached Ethan, his head bowed, his body language conveying submission. Ethan explained the situation, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. He told Peter about Maria's escape, about the children, about the old farmer who had interfered. "I need you to help me find them," Ethan said. "You know this area, you know the people. You can help me track them down." Peter hesitated, his conscience flickering faintly. He knew this was wrong, that he shouldn't get involved. But he also knew that refusing Ethan could have dire consequences. I don't know, Ethan," he stammered. "I don't want any trouble." Ethan grabbed Peter's arm, his grip tight and painful. "You're already in trouble, Peter," he said. "You helped me before, remember? You helped me with that other thing. You're just as guilty as I am." He was referring to a secret, a dark secret that bound them together, a secret that Peter had desperately tried to forget. It was a past misdeed, a crime that Ethan had committed and that Peter had helped him cover up. Peter's face paled, his body trembling. He knew he was trapped, caught in a web of fear and obligation. "Okay, Ethan," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll help you. What do you want me to do?" Ethan smiled, a cruel, satisfied smile. "That's a good boy, Peter," he said. "I knew I could count on you." He outlined his plan, his voice low and conspiratorial. He wanted Peter to scout the area, to question the locals, to find out where Maria and the children had gone. He also wanted him to gather information about Adrien Dubois, the old farmer, to find out his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities. "And Peter," Ethan added, his voice hardening, "if you betray me, if you even think about going to the police, you'll regret it. You know what I'm capable of." Peter nodded, his eyes filled with fear. He knew exactly what Ethan was capable of. He had seen it firsthand. As Ethan drove away, his truck disappearing into the stormy night, Peter felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was trapped, caught between his fear of Ethan and his own conscience. He knew he was doing something wrong, something terrible, but he felt powerless to stop it. The hunt had intensified, Ethan's rage and determination fueled by Peter's reluctant assistance. The storm raged on, the darkness deepening, and the danger to Maria and her children growing with each passing hour. The escape had been a temporary reprieve, but the pursuit was relentless, and the odds were stacked against them. The quiet countryside, once a symbol of peace and tranquility, had become a hunting ground, a place of fear and desperation, where the innocent were pursued by the guilty, and where the line between right and wrong was blurred by the shadows of the past. After leaving Adrian's farm, with the farmer's directions echoing in her mind, Maria drove the old, borrowed pickup truck as fast as she dared on the rain-slicked roads. The children were huddled in the back seat, wrapped in blankets, their faces pale and anxious. She had decided to head towards Harmony Creek, the nearest town, hoping to find help, to seek refuge, to put some distance between them and Ethan. She knew it was a risk, that Ethan might anticipate her move, but she had no other choice. She couldn't stay in the open countryside, exposed and vulnerable. The drive was tense and nerve-wracking. Every pair of headlights in her rearview mirror sent a jolt of fear through her, every approaching vehicle a potential threat. She kept glancing at the children, reassuring them, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she saw the lights of Harmony Creek shimmering through the rain-soaked darkness. It was a small town, a cluster of buildings nestled around a town square, a place that seemed peaceful and welcoming, a stark contrast to the terror she had left behind. She drove slowly through the town, her eyes scanning the streets, searching for a place to stop, a place to ask for help. She saw a small grocery store, its windows glowing warmly, and a tavern with a flickering neon sign. She decided to try the grocery store first. She parked the truck in front, her hands trembling as she turned off the engine. She took a deep breath, steeling her resolve. "Stay here," she whispered to the children. "Lock the doors. I'll be right back." She got out of the truck, her body aching, her legs stiff. She hurried towards the store, her heart pounding in her chest. The store was small and cozy, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and everyday necessities. A lone man stood behind the counter, his face etched with the lines of a life lived simply, his eyes kind and observant. He was Samuel Miller, the owner of the store, a pillar of the Harmony Creek community. Maria approached the counter, her voice trembling. "Please," she said, "I need help. My husband, he's trying to hurt us. We need a place to stay, somewhere safe." Samuel looked at her, his eyes taking in her disheveled appearance, her bruised face, her desperate plea. He didn't hesitate. "You've come to the right place," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'll help you. Come with me." He led her to a small back room, used for storage, but clean and warm. He brought her chairs, blankets, and a pot of hot coffee. "Stay here," he said. "I'll make some calls. We'll find you a safe place." Maria sank into a chair, her body shaking with relief. She had found a haven, a temporary respite from the storm, a place where she could catch her breath and gather her strength. Samuel, true to his word, started making calls. He contacted Mark Olson, the owner of the local tavern, a man known for his generosity and his willingness to help those in need. Mark immediately offered to put Maria and her children up in one of the rooms above the tavern, a safe and discreet location. He also contacted Isabel Ramirez, the town's police officer, informing her of Maria's situation and Ethan's pursuit. Isabel, already aware of the events at Michael Russo's bakery and Adrian's farm, assured Samuel that she would take immediate action. Within an hour, Maria and her children were settled in a small but comfortable room above the tavern. The room was clean and warm, with 2 beds, a small bathroom, and a window overlooking the town square. It wasn't much, but it was safe, and for now, that was all that mattered. Mark, a burly man with a gruff exterior but a kind heart, brought them food, drinks, and toys for the children. He assured Maria that they were safe, that he would protect them, that Ethan wouldn't get near them. "This is a small town, Maria," he said. "We look out for each other. You're not alone." Maria felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had found refuge in this small town, among strangers who had welcomed her with open arms, who had offered her help and support without hesitation. As she watched her children eat, their faces still pale, but their eyes losing some of their fear, she felt a flicker of hope. They had survived the escape, they had found a safe haven, and they had found allies in their fight for freedom. But she knew the danger was not over. Ethan was still out there, hunting them, fueled by his rage and his determination to reclaim what he considered his property. She knew she would have to be vigilant, that she would have to rely on the kindness of strangers, and that she would have to fight with every ounce of her strength to protect her children and build a new life for them. a life free from fear and violence. The village, a symbol of community and support, had offered them a temporary sanctuary, but the journey ahead was still long and uncertain, and the threat of Ethan's return loomed large, casting a shadow over their newfound hope. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction and a sense of unease that hung heavy in the air. The small town of Harmony Creek, usually peaceful and quiet, was now buzzing with activity, the arrival of police cars and unmarked vehicles signaling that something significant was unfolding. Isabel Ramirez, having been informed of Maria's location and Ethan's continued pursuit, had mobilized her resources. She had contacted the state police, requesting backup, and she had coordinated a plan to apprehend Ethan and Peter, ensuring the safety of Maria and her children. She arrived at the tavern, her face grim, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She found Maria in the upstairs room, huddled with her children, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion. "Maria, you're safe," Isabel said, her voice reassuring. "We're going to get him. He won't hurt you anymore." Maria nodded, her eyes filled with tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Isabel," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." Isabel placed a protective hand on Maria's shoulder. "Stay here," she said. "We'll handle this." She then briefed her team, outlining the plan. They knew that Ethan was likely armed and dangerous, and that he would be desperate to avoid capture. They had to proceed with caution, prioritizing the safety of everyone involved. Meanwhile, Ethan and Peter, having spent the night searching for Maria and the children, were growing increasingly frustrated and desperate. They had questioned locals, threatened shopkeepers, and scoured the countryside, but they had found no trace of their quarry. They were parked in Ethan's truck, hidden in a wooded area overlooking the town square, their eyes fixed on the tavern. They had seen Maria and the children entering the building earlier, and they were waiting for an opportunity to make their move. "We'll wait until dark," Ethan said, his voice low and menacing. "Then we'll go in and get them. No one will stop us." Peter nodded nervously, his hands trembling. He was increasingly uneasy about the situation, about Ethan's growing rage, about the potential consequences of their actions. But before they could put their plan into action, the police arrived. Several patrol cars, their sirens wailing, surrounded the tavern, blocking all exits. Officers, their guns drawn, approached the building, their voices shouting commands. Ethan, seeing the police, cursed under his breath. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted. His plan had failed. "We're trapped," Peter whimpered, his eyes wide with fear. "What are we going to do?" Ethan glared at him, his face contorted with rage. "We're going to fight," he said. "We're not going down without a fight." He reached under his seat, pulling out a handgun, his intention clear. He was going to make a stand, to take on the police, to fight to the bitter end. But before he could fire a shot, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Ethan Miller, this is the police. You are surrounded. Put down your weapons and come out with your hands up." It was Isabel's voice, amplified and commanding. She had positioned herself strategically, her officers covering all angles of approach, her focus unwavering. Ethan hesitated, his finger on the trigger, his mind racing. He knew he was outgunned, outnumbered, that resistance was futile. But his pride, his rage, his desperation urged him to fight. Suddenly, Peter, driven by a sudden surge of self-preservation, grabbed Ethan's arm. "Don't do it, Ethan," he pleaded. "It's over. We're caught. Don't make it worse." Ethan struggled against Peter's grip, his eyes filled with fury. "Let go of me, you coward," he shouted. But Peter held on, his grip surprisingly strong. He had reached his breaking point, his fear of Ethan outweighed by his fear of the consequences of further violence. The struggle lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. The police, seeing the movement in the truck, seized the opportunity. They stormed the vehicle, overpowering Ethan and Peter, disarming them, and dragging them out into the open. Ethan was subdued, his face pressed against the pavement, his hands cuffed behind his back. He cursed, he spat, he raged, but his struggles were futile. He was defeated, his reign of terror over. Peter, his body trembling, his face pale with fear, surrendered without resistance. He was taken into custody, his complicity in Ethan's crimes now exposed. Isabel approached Ethan, her expression a mixture of disgust and satisfaction. "It's over, Ethan," she said. "You're finished." Ethan glared at her, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won," he snarled. "I'll get out. And when I do..." Isabel cut him off, her voice cold and unwavering. "You'll get what you deserve, Ethan," she said. "Justice will be served." The arrest of Ethan and Peter brought a collective sigh of relief to Harmony Creek. The immediate threat was over, the danger neutralized. But the events of the past few days had left a lasting impact, shattering the illusion of peace and tranquility, exposing the darkness that had lurked beneath the surface. The justice system had arrived, bringing with it the promise of accountability and the hope for healing. But the true reckoning, the full extent of Ethan's crimes, was yet to be revealed, and the long journey towards recovery for Maria and her children was just beginning. With Ethan and Peter in custody, Maria and her children were finally safe. They were moved to a secure location, a women's shelter in a neighboring town, where they could receive counseling, support, and protection. The weight of fear, the constant threat of violence, began to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. But Maria carried a secret, a burden she had carried for years, a secret that had been intertwined with her fear of Ethan. Now, with Ethan behind bars and her children safe, she felt a growing need to unburden herself, to speak the truth, to finally seek justice for a crime that had haunted her for far too long. She requested a meeting with Isabel Ramirez, the police officer who had become her protector and confidant. They met in a quiet room at the shelter, the atmosphere one of trust and understanding. "Isabel," Maria began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Isabel nodded, her expression encouraging. "Take your time, Maria," she said. "I'm here to listen." Maria took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confession. "Ethan, he killed someone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Years ago, before we moved to Harmony Creek, he killed a man." Isabel's eyes widened in surprise, but she remained calm, her focus unwavering. "Tell me everything, Maria," she said. Maria recounted the story, her words tumbling out in a rush of guilt, fear, and relief. She explained that Ethan had been involved in a business deal that had gone sour. He had argued with his partner, a man named Robert, yet another different Robert, and in a fit of rage, he had killed him. "He made me help him," Maria said, her voice choked with sobs. "He made me help him dispose of the body. We buried him in the woods near our old house. I've lived with this secret for years, terrified of what Ethan would do if I ever told anyone." Isabel listened intently, her mind racing. This revelation changed everything. It wasn't just a case of domestic violence. It was a murder, a cold-blooded killing that had gone unpunished for years. "Maria," Isabel said, her voice firm, "you did the right thing by telling me. This is very important. We need to find Robert's body. We need to bring Ethan to justice for this crime as well." Maria nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'll show you," she said. "I'll take you to the place." With Maria's guidance, the police launched a search of the woods near their old house, located in a neighboring state. After days of painstaking effort, they found the remains of Robert, buried in a shallow grave. Forensic evidence confirmed his identity and the cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. Ethan, already facing charges of assault, kidnapping, and child endangerment, was now charged with first-degree murder. He vehemently denied the accusation, claiming that Maria was lying, that she was trying to frame him. But the evidence was overwhelming, and his credibility was shattered. Peter, Ethan's accomplice, facing his own charges and seeking leniency, corroborated Maria's story. He admitted to helping Ethan cover up the murder, providing details that matched the forensic evidence and Maria's account. The revelation of Ethan's past crime sent shockwaves through the community, adding another layer of horror to the already devastating story. The man who had terrorized his family had also taken a life, his violence extending beyond the walls of his home. The legal proceedings were lengthy and complex, but ultimately, justice prevailed. Ethan was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Peter, for his role in the cover-up, received a reduced sentence in exchange for his testimony. For Maria, the unburdening of her secret was a turning point. She had finally broken free from Ethan's control, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. She had found her voice, her courage, her strength. She and her children began the long process of healing. They received therapy, support, and the unwavering love of their community. They moved to a new town, far from Harmony Creek, where they could start fresh, build a new life, free from the shadows of the past. Lucy, James, and Gabriel, though scarred by their experiences, thrived in their new environment. They attended school, made friends, and gradually began to heal from the trauma they had endured. Maria found work as a counselor at a women's shelter, using her own experiences to help other victims of domestic violence. She became an advocate for change, speaking out against abuse, sharing her story, and inspiring others to find their voice and their strength. The aftermath of the escape, the arrest, and the revelation was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of community, and the enduring pursuit of justice. The storm had passed, the darkness had lifted, and a new dawn had broken, filled with hope, healing, and the promise of a brighter future. Maria's courage in speaking out and breaking the silence had not only saved her own life and the lives of her children, but it had also brought justice to a long-forgotten victim and exposed the depths of Ethan's depravity. The unburdening of the secret, the final act of defiance against a man who had controlled her for so long, was the ultimate act of liberation, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to healing, justice, and a new beginning for her and her children.